There's something you never recover from, a scar that never truly heals, a wound that just keeps on festering no matter how much time passes. For me, that something was losing my daughter, Sarah. She was just 6 years old when she supposedly died in a house fire, 25 years ago. I remember it like it was yesterday, the smoke, the sirens, the frantic search, and then the devastating news that they couldn't save her. My world ended that day, or so I thought. Because just a few weeks ago, a woman, a grown woman, knocked on my door and looked at me with eyes that were uncannily familiar, and she said, "Dad." Can you imagine? After a quarter of a century of grieving, of living with that gaping hole in my soul, my daughter was standing on my porch. And she wasn't alone. Was I wrong for what I did next? Tell me, would you have done the same thing? It all started back in the summer of 1998. I was a young man, barely in my late 20s, working hard to provide for my beautiful wife, Emily, and our precious little girl, Sarah. Sarah was the light of our lives, a bubbly, curious, and incredibly sweet child with a laugh that could brighten even the darkest day. She had her mother's striking blue eyes and my stubborn streak, a combination that made her both charming and a handful. We lived in a cozy little house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where kids rode bikes in the street and neighbors knew each other by name. Our life was simple, idyllic even. Emily was a stay-at-home mom dedicated to raising Sarah, and I worked as a carpenter, putting in long hours but always eager to get home to my 2 girls. We weren't rich, but we were happy, truly, deeply happy. One sweltering July evening, Emily and I had a rare opportunity for a date night. My sister, Clara, had offered to babysit Sarah. Clara was a few years older than me, a responsible and loving aunt who Sarah absolutely adored. We left Sarah tucked into bed, blowing her a final kiss, promising to bring her back a surprise. The restaurant was lively, and for a few hours, Emily and I were able to forget the stresses of life and just enjoy each other's company. We talked about our dreams, our plans for Sarah's future, and how lucky we were. The night was perfect until my phone rang. It was Clara, her voice a frantic, choked sob. "The house, Michael, it's on fire. Sarah, I can't find Sarah." My blood ran cold. The world tilted on its axis. Emily dropped her fork, her face going pale as she heard my end of the conversation. We were out of that restaurant faster than I thought possible, speeding home with a terrifying dread clawing at my throat. The scene that greeted us was a nightmare. Our street was ablaze with flashing red and blue lights, the air thick with the acrid smell of smoke. Firefighters swarmed around our house, which was engulfed in flames, a monstrous inferno devouring everything we owned, everything we were. I tried to rush in, but a strong hand pulled me back. Emily was screaming Sarah's name, her voice raw with terror, collapsing to her knees in the front yard. Clara, soot, stained and disheveled, was being tended to by paramedics, coughing violently, her eyes wide with shock and guilt. She kept repeating, "I tried, Michael. I tried to get her out. The smoke, it was too much." Hours blurred into an eternity. The firefighters worked tirelessly, eventually bringing the blaze under control, but the damage was done. The house was a charred shell, a monument to our lost dreams, and then came the news. They couldn't find Sarah. They searched through the debris, the hope draining from me with every passing minute. Finally, with heavy hearts, they concluded that Sarah had perished in the fire. They found what they believed were her remains, or at least enough to confirm a tragedy. A small, charred doll that she always slept with was recovered, cementing the horrifying truth. The funeral was a blur of tears, condolences, and an unbearable emptiness. Emily and I were broken. Our vibrant, happy life had been reduced to ashes. Clara was consumed by guilt, blaming herself incessantly, even though we assured her it wasn't her fault. The official report stated a faulty electrical wiring in the attic was the cause. Life after Sarah was a desolate landscape. Emily spiraled into a deep depression. Our once joyful home was filled with a silence that screamed her absence. Our marriage, which had been so strong, began to crack under the immense pressure of shared grief. We tried counseling, we tried to reconnect, but the ghost of Sarah stood between us, a constant reminder of what we had lost. Eventually, the pain became too much for Emily. She left me a year later, saying she couldn't bear to live in a place that reminded her so much of Sarah, or with a man who shared that same unbearable pain. I understood, even though it shattered me all over again. I was alone, truly alone. I sold the remains of the house, moved to a different city, and tried to rebuild my life, piece by agonizing piece. I never remarried, never had other children. Sarah was my only child, and her memory was all I had left. I focused on my carpentry, burying myself in my work, in the smell of sawdust and fresh, cut wood, anything to dull the ache in my heart. 25 years passed. I had aged, my hair now streaked with gray, my face etched with the lines of a life lived with a profound sadness. I had learned to function, to go through the motions, but a part of me always remained stuck in that fiery night. I never forgot Sarah, not for a single day. I kept a small locket with her baby picture, worn smooth from countless touches. I had resigned myself to a quiet, solitary life, believing that my greatest joy had been extinguished forever. Then came that Tuesday morning. I was in my garage workshop, sanding down a custom-made cabinet, when I heard a firm knock on my front door. I rarely had visitors, so I was a bit surprised. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the door, peering through the peephole. A woman stood there, mid-30s maybe, with long, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was holding a worn leather satchel. There was something about her, a familiarity that tugged at the edges of my memory, but I couldn't place it. When I opened the door, she looked at me, her blue eyes wide, and in them I saw it. The exact shade of blue, the same slight upturn at the outer corners that Emily had, and that Sarah had inherited. My heart hammered against my ribs. It couldn't be. It was impossible. She took a deep breath, and then, in a voice that trembled slightly, she said the word that turned my world upside down, "Dad." I just stared at her, dumbfounded. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the image of my 6-year-old daughter. Sarah, I whispered, the name feeling alien on my tongue after so many years. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she nodded slowly. "It's me, Dad, Sarah." I pulled her into a hug, a desperate, crushing embrace, not knowing if this was real, a dream, or some cruel hallucination. Her scent, the feel of her in my arms, it was all so real. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, tears streaming down both our faces. Finally, I pulled back, holding her at arm's length, needing to see her, truly see her. How are you here? We thought you died." She looked away for a moment, then back at me, a complex mix of emotions in her gaze. "It's a long story, Dad. Can I come in?" I ushered her inside, my head spinning. We sat on the couch, and she began to explain, a story so incredible, so heartbreaking, that it felt like it belonged in a movie, not in my quiet living room. She told me that on the night of the fire, Clara, my sister, hadn't just failed to get her out. Clara had actually taken her. My sister, my own flesh and blood, had kidnapped my daughter. Sarah explained that Clara had always been jealous of Emily, and of the family we had built. Clara had wanted a family of her own, but had struggled with infertility. This longing, combined with a deep-seated resentment, had twisted her mind. Clara had planned it all meticulously. She had deliberately started the fire to create a diversion, making it look like Sarah had died in the blaze. She had drugged Sarah earlier that evening, so she would be deeply asleep and wouldn't resist or cry out. While the fire department was battling the flames and I was frantic, Clara had taken Sarah, driven her across state lines, and started a new life under new names. Clara had raised Sarah as her own daughter, telling her that her birth parents had died in a tragic accident when she was a baby. She had changed Sarah's name to Lily and cut off all ties with our family, completely disappearing. Sarah, or rather Lily, grew up believing Clara was her mother, never knowing the truth. She described a childhood that wasn't particularly happy. Clara was often cold and distant, prone to emotional outbursts, and had moved them around frequently, always fearful of being found. Sarah said she always felt a strange sense of displacement, a feeling that something was missing, that her life didn't quite fit. She remembered faint, fragmented images of a different house, a different man, a different woman, but she dismissed them as childhood fantasies. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. Here was my daughter, alive, standing in front of me after 25 years of believing she was dead. She had been stolen from me by my own sister, a betrayal so profound it felt like a punch to the gut. And now she had returned, seeking answers, seeking me. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have confronted Clara immediately? Would you have called the police? Or would you have focused solely on reconnecting with your daughter, putting justice on hold? What would have been your first step? Sarah explained that she had only recently discovered the truth. Clara had fallen ill, a severe form of dementia, and in her confused state, she had started mumbling about the fire, about taking Sarah, about her real parents. Sarah, now a perceptive adult, pieced together the fragments of Clara's ramblings and her own vague memories. She started researching, digging into old newspaper archives, looking for house fires on specific dates, eventually finding articles about our house fire and the report of a missing child, Sarah Miller. She saw pictures of a younger me and a younger Emily, and the resemblance was undeniable. The pieces clicked into place, and the horrific truth dawned on her. It took her months to track me down, using what little information she had, ultimately finding me through my old carpentry business records. She felt a mix of anger, confusion, and an overwhelming need for answers, for closure, for her true identity. She had come to me first, before anyone else, needing to confirm everything, needing to see if I was real, if our connection was real. As she spoke, I felt a whirlwind of emotions, relief, joy, disbelief, but also a burning, incandescent rage. Rage at Clara, at the injustice, at the years stolen from me, from Emily, from Sarah herself. My own sister had robbed me of my daughter, of her childhood, of a quarter-century of memories. It was an unspeakable act, but looking at Sarah, seeing the vulnerability, the hurt, the hope in her eyes, I knew I couldn't just lash out. I had to be strong for her, for us. It's all true, Sarah, I said, my voice thick with emotion, every word. You are my daughter, my beautiful, brave Sarah. We spent the rest of the day talking, filling in the enormous gaps. I showed her old photo albums, pictures of her as a baby, as a toddler, pictures of Emily, of our old house. She cried, I cried, we laughed at silly memories. It was cathartic, painful, and glorious all at once. She looked at a picture of Emily, her mother, her true mother, and a deep sadness settled on her face. She's not here, is she?" I shook my head, explaining about Emily's depression and how she had eventually left, unable to cope. Sarah's face crumbled. "So I lost both of you, and then I lost her again." That night, Sarah stayed with me. We talked late into the night, sharing stories, experiences, trying to bridge the chasm of 25 lost years. It was a beautiful, surreal experience, but beneath the joy, the anger still simmered. I told Sarah that Clara needed to face justice. Sarah was hesitant. "She's sick, Dad, and she did raise me, however flawed it was. She's all I've ever known as a mother." I understood her conflicted feelings, but I couldn't let it go. Clara had stolen my child. She deserved to pay for her crimes. "She might be sick now, Sarah, but she committed a heinous crime, not just against me, but against you. She stole your identity, your family, your entire life." Sarah nodded slowly. "I know, it's complicated." The next morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't call the police immediately. I needed to gather more information, more evidence, and I needed Sarah to be ready, to be on board. We spent the next few days together, strengthening our bond. I introduced her to a few old friends who remembered her, who were just as shocked and overjoyed as I was. We visited our old neighborhood, stood in front of where our house used to be, a vacant lot now, overgrown with weeds. It was incredibly emotional for both of us. Then Sarah dropped another bombshell. "Dad," she began, her voice soft, "there's something else. I have a daughter." My jaw dropped. "A daughter? I'm a grandfather." A wide, joyous smile spread across my face. "Yes, Dad. Her name is Lily, after the name Clara gave me. She's 5 years old." My heart swelled. Not only had I gotten my daughter back, but I had a grandchild. Sarah then admitted that her daughter was waiting in the car. She had been nervous about bringing her in, unsure how I would react to such a sudden influx of family. I practically leaped off the couch. "Bring her in, bring my granddaughter in." Moments later, Sarah led a beautiful little girl with bright, curious eyes into my living room. She looked so much like Sarah, so much like Emily. I knelt down, tears in my eyes, and introduced myself as her grandfather. Lily, a little shy at first, eventually warmed up to me, giggling as I made silly faces. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a glimpse of the family I thought I'd lost forever. But the darkness of Clara's actions still loomed. After much discussion, Sarah and I decided on a course of action. We would confront Clara together. Sarah wanted closure, and I wanted justice. We drove to the nursing home where Clara was staying. Sarah had made arrangements for a private meeting. As we walked into her room, Clara was sitting in a wheelchair, staring blankly out the window. She was frail, her once sharp features softened by age and illness. "Clara," I said, my voice steady, though my heart pounded. She turned, her eyes unfocused, not recognizing me. Then she looked at Sarah. A flicker of recognition, a spark of fear, crossed her face. "Lily," she mumbled. "No, Clara," Sarah said, her voice firm. "It's Sarah, your niece, the daughter you stole from my father." Clara's eyes widened, a momentary flash of lucidity. "No, no, you died, the fire," she cried, her voice raspy. "You know what you did, Clara," I said, stepping forward. "You took my daughter, you destroyed our lives." Her mind, however, was already retreating into the fog of dementia. She began to cry, muttering incoherent apologies, begging for forgiveness, then suddenly asking for her own mother. It was clear that she was no longer fully aware of what was happening, no longer capable of a coherent conversation, let alone facing legal consequences in her current state. The confrontation wasn't what I had imagined. There was no grand confession, no dramatic showdown. Just a broken woman consumed by her illness. Sarah looked at me, a profound sadness in her eyes. "She's gone, Dad. The Clara we knew, the one who did this, she's not here anymore." I understood. The justice I craved felt hollow in the face of her condition. It wouldn't bring back the lost years, or undo the pain. But Sarah was here, alive, and she was my priority. We decided not to pursue legal charges against Clara. It felt pointless, almost cruel, given her state. Instead, we focused on rebuilding our lives, on making up for lost time. Sarah moved closer to me, bringing Lily with her. We spent every possible moment together, forging new memories, healing old wounds. I got to know my granddaughter, to spoil her, to experience the joys of being a grandfather, a role I never thought I'd have. Sarah eventually contacted Emily, her mother, a phone call that was incredibly difficult and emotional for everyone involved. Emily was living a very different life now, but the news of Sarah's return brought a torrent of emotions, a mix of joy and profound regret for the years she had missed. They began a slow, careful process of reconnecting, rebuilding a relationship that had been so cruelly severed. The fire had not been the end, but a twisted beginning. It had been a tragedy, a crime, but from its ashes, a new life, a new family had emerged. I learned that even after the deepest grief, hope can return. Even after the darkest betrayal, forgiveness, or at least acceptance, can be found. And love, true parental love, is an unbreakable bond that transcends time, distance, and even the grave. I may have lost 25 years with my daughter, but I gained her back, and I gained a granddaughter, and a second chance at a full, loving family life. My house is no longer silent. It's filled with laughter, with stories, with the joyful noise of a little girl, a sound I thought I'd never hear again. I still miss the years we lost, the milestones I wasn't there for, but I cherish every new moment, every new memory we create. Life is fragile, precious, and utterly unpredictable. So that's my story. It's been a long, painful journey, but one that has brought me back to the greatest joy imaginable. Like this video if you were on my side, if you think Sarah and I made the right choices in the end. Subscribe for more stories like this, because there are so many unbelievable things that happen in this world. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. I'd love to hear your perspectives. I'll see you all in the next story.